we're going to swipe your bank account. He took all our cash, which, by the way, if it was an asset purchase, you keep your cash, right? What's in market? Like, how are they going to treat deferred revenue? How are they going to treat net working capital? How are they going to, because price is one of the many variables, right? And a good business banker, I think a lot of people think that's the end all, right? And they don't realize that there's alternative assets out there. There's real estate, there's private equity, there's people that invest in this company, like this private equity shop that bought my company and made a ton of money for their investors, right?
You are entering lifestyle dentist territory where healthy, wealthy, generous dentists choose to live epic lives on their terms with freedom and fulfillment. I'm your host, Dr. Garth Hatch. Buckle up for another exciting episode. Hello, Garth Hatch here, and super excited for this episode of Lifestyle Dentist. Have got a baller on the call today, Travis Dillard, good friend of mine who is a real estate investor, a serial businessman. He's had a very successful, I know at least one very high figure successful business exit, and has started many different businesses. So we'll get into that. And author of the book 0 to 100, which when people ask me about investing in real estate, that's one of my top 3 that I like to recommend. Yeah, because it really is. I love the way you guys break it down with you and Mitchell and Gabe. And all 3 of you guys are the real deal too. You're not talking about it. I mean, you guys are actively investing in real estate and have done it. And with the 3 of you, a combined net worth over 100 million. So that's legit. That is really amazing what you guys have been able to accomplish. So love to get into it. Travis, how you doing, man?
I'm happy to be here, Garth. Thanks for having me, man. We're kind of neighbors. I'm over here in Hood River.
Yes. We're both in the Pacific Northwest, so it's easy to get together. So yeah, in fact, we're planning on getting together in June. I'm going to be going out to their event, so it's going to be fun. So good times, man.
Nice. Yeah. Well, sitting here in a snowgeddon. We got a snow blizzard going on here. So great.
Oh, is that right? In Hood River, you got some snow going?
Yeah.
We had some. It's funny, in Eastern Washington, we get right around Valentine's Day is when we start getting snow, and then it sticks around for a couple weeks and then it's gone. So that'll be interesting to see how it is. It depends on the year. Sometimes we'll get it in November, December, but yeah, it's been really, really mild this year. Not that I'm complaining, just as long as we get enough snow for the mountains, I guess.
Amen.
So, well, for those that do not know Travis Dillard, let's talk about you. Little Travis, a little bit about your background and where you're at now.
Still little. I'm like 5'7". So
you look big, man. You look like you're like 6'4".
Right. Yeah. You keep thinking that. So, so my background, I was born and raised in a small town. I mentioned it, Hood River, when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. Hood River was, it was logging and agriculture, right? So your parents had a traditional job, which might be teacher, lawyer, dentist, or your dad worked at the mill. And so my dad worked at the mill. Great childhood. Didn't come from means by any means. I lived with my dad. We had lived in a double wide, lived the life. My dad, worked his ass off. He was the most selfless guy in the world, but he graduated high school and went to Vietnam. So he didn't understand college or investing or any of these sorts of things. And so it was just him and I, and he worked 2 shifts at the mill and did a paper out on Sunday, sort of just like keep the lights on. But because of that, he was able to, feed me and buy me wrestling shoes and do the things, support me. And again, just like one of the most selfless men ever on earth. That's awesome. This is one of those towns where, it's like you're a sophomore in high school and you go in and you're like, you go to the guidance counselor, which is kind of a horse crap word because there's no guidance from these people. At least then there wasn't. And I go into the guidance counselor and they're like, well, what do you want to do? Here's a book of jobs. I'm like, I'm a sophomore in high school. Like I'm lucky I got my shoes tied and got to school this morning. and that was it. And then from there it's like, well, just go to college. You got to go to college. You got to go to college. You got to go to college.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. It's nice that you said that. I had no money for school. I had no means, I mean, I worked odd jobs. I was like a typical kid. And so, I decided, well, how am I going to get a degree? Like that's the holy grail, right? Got to get that degree. And so I thought, oh, I know I will join the military. And there's different ways you can join the military, by the way, for people that are listening, tell their kids this. You can go enlisted or you can go be an officer. Well, actually, you were an officer, right?
Yeah, they paid for my dental school. Yeah.
Yes. See, you were the smart kid, right? I wasn't the smart kid. And I didn't have much guide. Like, I didn't take an SAT test because my dad's like, I don't know, SATs. Like, that was on a Saturday. I don't want to. And so I got out. And so you go talk to a recruiter, and they're saying, oh yeah, you got it. You got to enlist. I'm like, well, what about this like ROTC thing, like, or academy? Is that something I should look into? And he's like, oh no. Because he feels
he just wants to fill his quote, I'm sure.
Right. And he's not the officer guy, right? He's like, oh no, officers, you don't want to do that. Okay, well, and then I was, I graduated high school and I enlisted in the Air Force, and I'm in boot camp. And I'm like, oh, yep, big mistake. I should have got, because I had the grades for it. Like, what am I doing here? Anyway, long story short, the military was good. I ended up joining after boot camp in school, I ended up joining a combat communications squadron. So communications, because I remember asking my boss, who was actually a senator, before I went in, I'm like, hey, I could do this like aircraft avionics maintenance thing. I can go be like a security police, or I can do this telecommunications thing. And he goes, yeah, do the telecommunications thing. Those skills are going to transfer more readily to the civilian world. So anyway, I joined a combat communications squadron, which is funny because my dad is a Vietnam vet, right? And he's like, oh, communications, you're going to be sitting in an air conditioned building, in the United States somewhere. It's going to be super safe, well, again, I'm in a combat comm squadron. So your job's to actually deploy like in with the Marines oftentimes, like to these, luckily I was in like between 95 and 99. So there wasn't any major conflicts. But what was cool about it is when I was stateside, I would take night classes. So like every Air Force base has an education office, and you have like, we were in Mountain Home, Idaho. So you have Boise State was there, and you had Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and you had some other schools. And so I could take classes at night while I was stateside. And then when I deployed, I would just like load up this pallet full of VHS tapes, correspondence courses, in a TV, right? This is the OG correspondence course. There was no streaming. There was
before internet streaming, huh?
Yeah, nothing like that. So I'd deploy, and you would work your butt off for like 2 weeks to set up the communications, like the satellite dishes and the microwave shots, and set up the networks and the crypto and all of that. And then you sit there for 4 to 5 months and do nothing. You work 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. So I would deploy, and I would get out my correspondence, my VHS tapes, and it was a midterm and a final. You flunk one, you fail. And it was administered by like an E9 chief. And you'd watch this guy lecturing to a classroom in Florida, and on a VHS tape, and you take notes. And so I was able to get a ton of my schooling done that way. So I graduated, I got out of the military after 4 years, and I spent most of my time in the military, either in the Middle East or South Korea or different places like that. And I got out, and I think I had like 2 classes left to finish. So I finished them up, and I had the holy grail. I had the Bachelor's of Science degree through Embry-Riddle, and it's sitting on my shelf. It's collecting dust. It's done 0 for me in my entire life. Like I missed out on all the fun with my buddies because I'm always like studying at night, but it was good. I completed it. I think it was valuable. I would highly recommend that. The military at the time paid 75% of my tuition. I picked up the other 25% and my books, but now they pay for everything, I think. And so, but because what really took off for me is because I was in telecommunications, just like that guy told me. I got into telecom and worked for like IT companies or different communications companies in my early 20s. And then I'll take a break here and see if you have any questions, because then a whole new journey I embarked on a whole new journey after I got out of the military and I started my first business.
Just one thing that is interesting, how it's amazing how our lives can just switch on a little advice or something. The guy that recommended telecommunications instead of doing whatever combat infantry or whatever, in the Air Force, which is a small deal, but obviously made such a huge difference and impact on your life And I think that's good advice for anybody, especially I've got kids that are at that age right now in college and graduating high school and kind of what am I going to do with, my life type thing. And if you can get good advice and also good advice as far as try to focus on a skill that's in need, whether you go and get a degree or not, just find something that is in value now. Like that right now, I mean, it's still telecommunications is such a huge need. The internet, the AI. I mean, there's even a lot of blue collar skills like electrician, plumbers are doing really well, and they're just not as it's not as sexy, but it's in huge demand.
Well, yeah, I mean, I mentor kids now in the high schools, and I mentor this program called Avid, and I agree, like it's still the same message. And I'm not poo-pooing people that go to college. Obviously, I worked my ass off to go to college, but it's like also I think the message of go to college at whatever it takes. It doesn't matter what degree you get, doesn't matter what school you go to, doesn't matter how much in student debt you're on. Just go do it because the world's going to open up. And, the clouds are going to part, unicorns are going to fly down from the rainbows. It's not necessarily true. There's people that took that advice. They're in, multi 6-figure debt and they're unfortunately working 2 jobs as a barista or whatever. And you got the guy, like you said, the guy that like became an apprentice electrician and a journeyman, and he's making 6 figures. And it's so I always tell people to sort of take that advice with a grain of salt. And maybe college isn't for everybody, but there's multi-millionaire electricians or plumbers that start out, become journeymen, make good money, save up some money, make a couple of good investments. Maybe they start their own. And there's just not enough people going into the trades right now to where there's a supply demand imbalance and people can do really well. So this whole go to college, whatever it takes, I think might not be the best advice for everybody. And I think it can set some people up for absolute success. And I feel like other people can set them up for failure because my college degree did nothing for me except give me confidence that I can see something through. And there's also there's a lot to be said when you read and write a lot, sort of streamline your presentation skills and you can articulate, have some critical thinking. But I certainly didn't need to take 50% of those classes that were just fluff so the college can make money.
But no, it's so true. It's so true. Unless you're going to do something specific, an accountant, a dentist, a doctor, an attorney, most of these, an engineer, I guess, similar, most Architect. Of these degrees, you'd be better off just going to work for somebody and get some real life skills in an industry that's in demand right now.
Well, I'll tell you, like I got a business degree and none of that transferred over to actually starting a business. And me starting my first business when I was 22 years old and got my teeth kicked in and I sort of ran it insolvent, I'll get to that story in a second, but that was my MBA, man. That was an education. It wasn't, taking organizational structure classes in college. Like that did nothing for me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, let's just dive right into that because that's a good segue. You got out of the military. You probably have a little money saved up, have some experience, definitely got some great skills with your telecommunications. Tell us about that first business and really the jump because that's pretty brave too because a lot of people just go get a job and work for somebody else.
Well, I did actually. I had a stint there where I did go to work for somebody else. Yeah, first of all, I got out of the military with no money.
Okay.
I was
That's
stationed. I departed the military in Korea, but whenever I had to leave, we were flying to Singapore, and I had a great time, right? Yeah. And I was planning to get out, become a bartender, save up some money, and go do that for a couple years. And I wish I would have done that. So, you young people listening, like. Take some time off, man. Like go out and see the world and backpack and I always said, well, I'll go back to doing that. But then you get a job, then you get commitments. And then eventually you start families and it's much more difficult. So I worked for a couple of companies after I got out of the military in telecommunications. So I was like the IT. I was like the tech guy. I worked in a company that did that managed large national networks, and I worked in their network operations center. And then after that, I worked for like an IT company, but I was specializing in sort of the IT/communication stuff. And then my boss said, "Hey, we should go start a business." I'm like, "Well, that sounds like a fantastic idea. Let's go start a business." And we quit our job. We did okay. We were limping along. We were growing. We hired a person here and there as we grew. Again, I was learning the ropes. I was in my early 20s. I had bought a house, a little 714 square foot house on the using the VA loan. So zero down, had a sweet 8.5% interest in 2000. So for those of you that are complaining about rates. So I went on our own and didn't pay myself. And I also learned we were both kind of tech guys. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess the business doesn't just walk in the door. You actually have to go prospect and you have to be in sales. And my boss, now my business partner, my ex-boss, he was certainly not that guy. So I became like, oh, I guess I'm going to be the sales guy. And I remember, crap, man, we need to get projects. So I would pick up the phone. These are things called landlines, or these things I used to plug into a wall. And the yellow pages, right? Remember those, the yellow pages?
Oh, yeah.
And I was just calling business after business from my home because we didn't have an office, trying to get an appointment to go, because we sold phone systems to businesses. We sold like networks and stuff like that. And that started growing, and we hired a salesperson and we hired a couple of techs, and it was like, we're starting to get a little momentum. And this was around 2001. So 9/11 took a beating on our business. So that was like the first punch in the face. It was 9/11. And then my business partner was when I met him, he was a workaholic, which works well when your business partner is a workaholic, except he wanted me to be a workaholic. And I'm like in my 20s. I'm like, yeah, I'll work like 50 hours a week. But this guy was working like 80, right? Because he was so miserable. He never wanted to go home. So he would just work all the time, and he expected me to. So that was the first misalignment with with the partnership. And then he's transitioned from being a workaholic to an alcoholic. And that was the big problem. So he and his wife was running the books. I didn't really know what we were doing. He ran the business insolvent. They were embezzling a ton of money out of the business, paying themselves a ton of money that I didn't know. He's buying rounds of drinks for the bar every night on the company credit card. So the whole thing crashed and burned. And I just remember it was like 2:00 in the morning. I'm sitting in this office in this super sketch part of town, because it was the only office we could afford. And I'm just thinking, like, what happened? And I dissected, where did all our money go? All our credit lines were maxed. We owed a ton of money to the IRS because they were not submitting the employer contribution part of payroll. So like, that's a big deal. The IRS doesn't like that. When you withhold an employee's check, you damn well better pay the IRS and not spend it at the bar, right? So that was happening. There was a bunch of suppliers we owed money to that we were personally guaranteed on. I didn't even understand what a personal guarantee was, right? So not that they had a lot to take in those days. So I learned a hard lesson. And then this guy approached me and he said, hey, I'll buy your business. Wow. I was like, oh, sweet. Salvation. That's going to save me. I'm going to buy my business. This guy's going to buy my business. And he turned out to be just a crook. But so I signed it. I mean, I'm just like in my 20s. My business partner is nowhere to be found. He's like way off, way bad shape now from an alcohol, alcohol is dominating his life now. And so I signed up. I thought, oh, this sounds great. The deal was, I'll pay you, I'll buy your business, and in turn, I'll give you 10% of my business, and I will pay off all of your personally guaranteed debt, and I'll pay you $600 a month on an earn out. I'm like, whatever. You're going to pay off the debt? Because I was like, I hadn't even got going, and I was like so in the hole in life. And I signed the LOI, and he's like, great, let's get moving on the integration. Well, by the way, letter of intent is non-binding. Just want you to know that. So, and I didn't know that. And it's like, sweet, we're going to transfer your phone lines over. So when your customers call, it's going to ring our office. We're going to swipe your bank account. He took all our cash, which, by the way, if it was an asset purchase, you keep your cash, right? Took all of our customer lists. Like, it happened overnight. I had no business. And now I'm working for him as a project manager. Miserable, because I'm a horrible project manager. And he comes to me and just says, hey, I'm like, okay, well, he's like, you need to go set up payment plans for all of your creditors, because we don't want to pay it all up front. We want to spread it out. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I set up a payment plan with the IRS, set up payment plans with our suppliers. And then after the first month went by, he came to me and said, just want you to know, I'm not going to make these payments. So you need to go file bankruptcy, and you sign a letter of intent, it's non-binding. So basically, screw you. This guy is a dirt. But if we have time in this podcast, there was retribution with this guy, right? But so I was screwed. And so I'm like, I made a huge mistake. So not only did I have all this debt when I'm early 20s that I'm personally guaranteed on, I've got the IRS knocking at my door. I'm in like all this trouble. And so I said, okay, well, I'm expendable. This guy, he doesn't care. I'm a project manager. There's a project managers are a dime a dozen. Like, I need to make myself useful. This guy's going to screw me. So I became really good at sales. I studied. I said, I want to be a salesperson. I want to be a full commission salesperson. So I don't want to be an overhead. And I was like, because I knew my tech, and I knew I could talk to people, and I knew I could out hustle all my competitors. I could just outwork people. And so I became the top salesperson in that company. And but this guy was like selling new phone systems to businesses, but then installing used ones and putting like new stickers on it. Like this guy was a crook.
Crazy.
But I ended up selling, and in that role, they'd give you a deposit check, a 50% deposit check, so you could go buy the equipment. And then anyway, long story short, I'd bring the check in and I'd be like, here's the check. And they're always like not meeting payroll. This company was just so bad. It's such a cowboy operation. They'd be like, nope, I'm not giving you this check until you make my pay 2 months ahead on my payments to my suppliers, pay the IRS, pay the old office lease that I was personally guaranteed on. Oh, and pay me my commission ahead of time. So I got really good, and I brought in like, 6-figure checks.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then after 20, and then they would pay me my commission, and I'd pay off I'd be making my payments, but I stockpiled a little cash. Right. And because I knew as soon as all my debts were paid off, I was going to give the middle finger to this company and walk. And I remember that day. I remember at 24 months, I was done and I walked out the door.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was my first entrepreneurial.
So many lessons from that. I mean, I'm impressed too that you could have just said, screw this and filed bankruptcy. That's impressive that you didn't, even despite all that, being screwed by 2 different guys. You paid your debts and made it whole, and obviously learned a ton of business lessons then, how to sell, how to avoid getting screwed in the future.
I got screwed in the future one more time, and that was it. But yeah.
I'm not very smart. Well, that could happen to any of us anytime, I guess, with the right song and dance and person. But yeah, talk about some tough lessons young. But with that said, talk about a blessing. I mean, a lot of guys never learn those lessons, or their 40s and 50s when it happens, and they just get broke when it happens.
Right.
I mean, at least it happened when you're young and hungry and were able to fight your way through that, man.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that it happens, for you, not to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because because I know we're running out of time and I want to get into how the fun stuff that we've done. But
yes.
Yeah, I mean, the next endeavor was basically a guy was nice. He was but he was a bad business person. I was a sales guy for that business. He ran it insolvent. And I was like the face of the company. So again, I was taking those deposit checks, handing them to him, and this sort of became like an accidental Ponzi scheme. He was taking the money, but then he overstaffed. He ran his business again insolvent. So he was making payroll and not buying the equipment. So I'd have to go make the next sale to pay the equipment for the last job. It was just sort of like this game of musical chairs. Eventually it all collapsed, and I'm like the face of the company. And these guys, like people had given, like nonprofits had given $50,000, $60,000 deposit checks that were gone. Right. And so I felt really bad for these people. And I remember thinking about this. I'm like, okay, well, I got to take care of these people, these customers. Like they looked me in the eyes and I shook their hand as a sales guy. And so long story short, I said, okay, well, I'm going to do one of 2 things. I'm going to call our major competitor in Seattle and say, look, you just got to fund these jobs, and then you'll get paid on the back half. You won't make money on those jobs, but you're going to get a small staff that we have. You're going to get some maintenance contracts. Like this is your way to expand into Portland, basically for free.
Yeah.
And then so I left a message for him with his assistant or his receptionist. And I go, if I don't hear back from him, then I'm going to start this thing on my own. Never heard back from him, by the way. And as a side note, I talked to him years later and he said, I never got the message. He goes, my God, I would have loved that deal. So his receptionist, she was kind of snarky to me and didn't take me seriously. So I lived in a little condo. This is where I get into kind of my real estate. So that first house I bought on the VA loan, I sold. I had bought a little condo that I was living in. The '08 crash happened, by the way. Simultaneous to this, I was building spec homes. So I would buy a lot on an interest-only loan, and because they were giving loans out to everybody. This is pre-'08. And I'd put a house, I'd build a house and I'd sell it. People were making a ton of money then. I had 3 lots. One house was going up, and then the '08 crash happened. So I ended up moving into the house. I ended up holding one lot and lost about $150,000 over the next 8 years because I was paying those interest-only payments. And then one lot I sold and I broke even. So, man, I'm having a bad real estate and entrepreneurial journey in my life. I probably should have thrown in the towel. If that happened today, I'd probably just like, okay, I'm going to go get another job. But so that was happening simultaneously to me taking this business over. I was upside down on my equity on this condo that I lived in, but I had a credit line on it. And so I'm like, I'm going to start this. I'm going to just take this business on. So, but the suppliers had liens on all the assets. So I had to go I only had it was just me and like 2 other employees. I'm like, everybody work from home. I'm going to go borrow money from my house and I'm going to pay your payroll because the guy wasn't paying the payroll. I'm going to give you 1/2 of a payroll and I'm going to take that money and I'm going to go buy the equipment for this one job, right? Install it and get the next job and then sort of leapfrog it. Mm-hmm. And so it was funny. The minute I drew down that line of credit from this condo that is upside down on, they froze a line of credit because like, crap, you're upside down. Like you can't you can't take a home equity line of credit when you're negative equity on this property. Cause that was 2008, right? Like all this stuff was happening. And I went and started this business and I did that. We bought equipment, installed that one, and got paid on it. And I told all my customers, like, I'm sorry, your money's gone. I'm funding this myself personally. I will take care of you, but you're going to have to work with us on timing because I can only do one at a time. Yeah. And somewhere in the meantime, I had to close a job that would actually be profitable. Mm. So I slowly did that. I was managing the cash down to like the penny, grew it, started having success. I had a business. One of those guys became my business partner because he was like the operations guy. I was a sales guy. Mm. And we started getting more and more customers. We were actually profitable. We grew. We hired some more people. And then in 2013, my partner died unexpectedly, actually on Valentine's Day, which is tomorrow. Jeez. So this is 2013. Wow. Yeah. So he, that was another crisis, right? Mm-hmm. So we had to sort through that and sort of backfill him. And long story short, we grew, we were profitable. I started finding other competitors. Like we were in the Portland, Vancouver, sort of Oregon, Washington markets. Mm-hmm. And I had some opportunities to buy some other competitors. So I would go down and take a line of by then I finally had a line of credit. When I first started this thing, I had no lines of credit from the bank. I had no lines of credit from my suppliers. It was just like a cash in, cash out business. Mm-hmm. I finally got some lines of credit and I'd give 50% down to buy a competitor and I'd have them carry an earnout. So we made 4 acquisitions along the way. Long story short, we grew that business to be one of the top national telecommunications companies in what we did. That's awesome. So we actually were one of the first companies. We started virtual, everybody working from their house out of necessity. And by the time I exited the company in 2020, I had 100 employees all working from their house across 14 states. We had a call center in Honduras. So it was it took a long time. And I learned how to buy companies. I learned how to value companies. I learned, how to put a great leadership team in place. So I sort of took myself out of the day-to-day, really mastered marketing, built recurring revenue, all the things that you should do when you're building a business to exit. And then I exited in 2020 to a private equity company for $25 million. And then we exited again. That private equity company, I was the CEO for 6 months. And I'm like, oh man, this sucks. Not for me. So I fired myself, put another CEO in place, and then they exited 2.5 years later for $190 million, which is pretty cool. And so I got 2 bites at the apple. And all along the way, I parlayed. So kind of parallel to this, as I was growing my business, I was building a real estate portfolio. So I would buy and I could get into that in a little bit. But actually, let me pause, see if you have any questions. Yeah,
because there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, it's amazing. A lot of people think, oh man, this guy's worth 8 figures. He had it all figured out. It was just smooth sailing. And so few people see when you're getting kicked in the face and the tough times and the almost bankruptcy. And I think that's more common than not when you really look at people that have reached real high net worth, that they've had to deal with things and came out ahead afterward, so kudos to you on that. And as far as with buying businesses, because now it's more of a growing trend, but at least I didn't hear much about it back in 2008, that time. What gave you that idea? Is it just something you figured out, or did a mentor talk to you about that, or how did that come about?
It's like everything in my life, accidentally. I had a guy working for me that was kind of a schmoozer, and he said, hey, he struck up a friendship with a guy that owned a company in Northern California, and said, and this guy came from, where did this guy come from? He was actually a business banker, I think. So he kind of knew the M&A world. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, you need to buy this guy. I'm like, wait, buy? What do you buy a company? Like, I can't afford that. Like, what does that mean? He's like, just talk to him, man. Just figure it. And long story short, yeah, the guy's like, yeah, I'll sell. And he had a book of business. He had some service contracts, had a couple of good employees, a couple of great accounts. And I'm like, well, I'll give you this valuation. I based it on a multiple of his recurring revenue. I gave him no credit for any one-time revenue, which is actually, I'm glad I did that. Mm-hmm. And I just said, I'll give you 50% down and you carry a contract for the other 50%. But that other 50%, I'll pay you quarterly. if your reoccurring revenue renews at a certain targets. And, so I protected myself. So I borrowed against my credit line that I had at that point. And then I did so I structured it basically as a no cash down, and I was cash flow positive day one. And I got all these new customers and I got some synergies. And so I was like, wow, that was easy. Like, I should do that again. And so I did it 3 more times.
Nice.
With even subsequently bigger businesses, which was like, I didn't understand EBITDA multiples or SDE multiples or net working capital or stock purchase versus asset purchase or anything. I was like, oh, I'm just going to like go buy this business and grow that way. And so we expanded into California that way, and then Texas. And then the rest of my growth became just was organic.
Yeah. And this would probably be a good time to dive in, because there's a lot of dentists that are selling their practice now, either to a private equity group, DSO type group, or to associate, or they're just kind of burnt out. They're ready to retire. And so they want to find Johnny come lately out of his residency and sell his practice to that person. Or some literally just have to just close the doors. They literally just lock it up and leave. What advice would you give to people that are trying to get ready to sell their business at some point? In this case, in particular, their practice, but yeah, it's all business, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. I would say, first of all, go back even further. Whenever you're starting anything, whether you're buying a real estate asset or whether you're starting a business, always start with the end in mind. And I think that's something most people don't do. They're like, I'm just going to run this business forever and it's going to be great. And I'm going to be a dentist and I'm going to own the practice. But you always need to start with the end in mind, because that's going to force you to make different decisions. You're going to build it up so the business doesn't rely on you, which is what every business owner should do. I mean, even Robert Kiyosaki said that it's not a true business unless you can actually leave and come back and come back a year later and it's more profitable because you have the right people in place. So you're going to get a team in place. You're going to get, maybe if you're a dentist, associate dentist with some leadership skills, you're going to build systems and processes that doesn't rely on you. You're going to like have the right accounting, like GAAP accounting is really, at least in our industry, was big. And so you're going to build the business to sell. And now here's the thing. If you decide not to sell, great. You've got a well-run business with great KPIs and you have good financial acumen and it doesn't rely on you. So you're not like trading out, hours for dollars. You're not on the treadmill where if you drop off, like the whole thing falls apart. So if you're going to sell or not, build the sell. For sure, 100%. And then I would also say, no, I know, especially in the dental world, right? There is a lot of private equity interest, which is really good if you're on a practice. So I don't know about the dental world, but I also know there's certain thresholds of EBITDA. EBITDA is like basically the net profit of a business before you back out taxes, depreciation, amortization, interest, some other stuff. I know, like in my business, like if you were, a sub 1 million in EBITDA, you were going to trade at a 3 multiple. If you were over $1 million to 3 million, you're going to trade at like that 5 to 6 multiple. If you're over 3 million, you get a 7 to 8 multiple. If you're over 10 million, you get a 10 multiple. So understand how businesses or practices are traded, right? If it's I think dentists might be a top line revenue number, maybe not, but like understand that and build that.
Yeah, I think they do both, but a lot of times now, especially with private equity, is the EBITDA. Yeah.
Right. Because because they want to take it, like the private equity guys I sold don't want to take it from 3 to 10 exit. And they do it through acquisitions and they cost takeouts and things like that. So I would say that understand that. Also, like you're going to get courted by a lot of private equity guys. Hire a business banker, hire a business banker, hire a business banker. This is like, they're called like a business broker. In the smaller businesses, when you get larger, it's called a business banker, right? And I interviewed a ton of business bankers, and I went with these guys, and they were phenomenal. They charged me $1 million as a success fee, and at first I was like, "Wow, that's really high." Well, in one phone call, they increased my price by basically $2 million in one phone call when they were negotiating. So they run a process. Get with a business banker that truly understands the industry that you're in. They know the players. They know who the buyers are. They know the multiples. They know who are the strategic buyers, who are the financial buyers, like what groups look like that. And most strategic buyers, which are quote unquote non-private equity, have private equity sponsors, right? So everything's going private equity these days, especially in the dental world. And so I'd say pick the right business banker, and they'll run a proper process. So they'll go out, they'll send out what's called a business teaser, which is like confidential, or it's generic. Doesn't say who's actually being sold. Like, here's a practice, X EBITDA. Here's the benefits. Here's the growth, et cetera. People that are interested will sign an NDA, and they run a whole process to where your business banker controls the process. So they'll solicit as much interest as they can, and then they'll get people spending money on due diligence as long as they can before you sign what's a letter of intent, which isn't binding, but its exclusivity is binding, meaning you can't go negotiate with any other private equity shops or buyers. Like, you're stuck with this person. But a good business banker will run a really good process and get private equity guys spending money and time before you sign that LOI, because the more money and time they have into it, the stickier these buyers are going to be. And so, but yeah, I mean, I remember before I sold, we had 14 LOIs that we were looking at. And so there was a lot of interest in our business because our business bankers ran a great process. And then pick the right private equity guys and understand like what's in market. Like, how are they going to treat deferred revenue? How are they going to treat net working capital? How are they going to, because price is one of the many variables, right? And a good business banker is going to help you navigate like what's acceptable. Because a lot of guys, if you just have one buyer, that sounds great. I'll sell it. Oh, that sounds like a great price. Well, how did you know you couldn't have got $3 million more for it, or got 3 more turns on your EBITDA? Or they're going to give you a price to lure you in. You're going to sign a letter of intent, and then they're going to get you into diligence and beat the crap out of you and beat your price down. They're going to retrade you, and they're going to trick you with things like, oh yeah, like we had $6 million of deferred revenue on our books. Well, most private equity, they make you reduce that from your purchase price. So but my business makers knew the game. So they negotiated before we went into exclusivity. You don't get to treat deferred revenue as a liability. Anyway, it's all these things that make multiple millions of dollars of difference. So hire a good banker. That's probably the number one. And then pick a really good private equity company. Number two, last thing I'll say is with that private equity company if it is private equity, they're going to want you to roll, right? They're going to want you to roll 20% or 30%, or maybe they might just give you an earnout. They don't give you a roll. Choose a roll. Say, pay me 80%, pay me 70%. I want to roll the other 30% into stock in your entity, because these guys they sell every 5 to 7 years. You want that second bite of the apple. I didn't think that. I'm like, I want to roll as little as possible. I want all my cash up front. And my business banker said, Travis, you should consider rolling at least 20% because you'll be happy you did. Well, I made more money on the second bite. I went from being a 60% owner of the company because I had my leadership team I had given 40% to an 8% owner of the company, but I made more on the second bite. That second bite, absolutely lucrative. So there you go.
That's awesome. That's really good advice. And you're right. The private equity groups that know what they're doing, and most do, they're going to have a pretty good, I should say, at least if they're good, they know what they're doing. And yeah, you're going to get that second bite of the apple, which is huge. So wow, that's really good advice. Hey, to switch gears now, let's get into the investing side, because I know there's a lot of dentists that are doing well with their practice, or at least they can get to where they're doing well pretty fast, but then they're paying a lot in taxes. Maybe they're doing a 401k or something like that. But besides that, most of them don't really have many assets, especially cash flowing assets that are going to put money in their pocket month after month, whether they're working or not. And I know being there's a lot of stress when everything is on you to show up to work and do dentistry, and you've got bills, you've got family to take care of, house payment, and if you don't show up, daddy doesn't get paid, and there's a lot of stress to that. And so if you can start to acquire assets, it's a whole new world. And so it sounds like you started that pretty young with that first house you bought. Can you dive into that? I know that your book, 0 to 100, which again, I've already mentioned it. If you haven't read that book, it's a great book. It's on Audible too. You can listen to it, but awesome the way you guys break that down. But yeah, if you could dive into that on purchasing assets.
Right. Yeah. I love that you mentioned, real estate's an alternative asset, right? And we're all taught, again, we're like, brains are hardware and the software is what people teach us, our teachers, our parents, and we're taught work really hard, go to college and give as much as you can to Wall Street, right? Which is a 401k. A 401k is really, it's good. It's good for somebody that wants to work and retire at 70, live a few more years and die. It sounds so condescending, but like,
that's true though. It's true. Yeah.
Right. Well, they're told you, why do you think we're taught to go to work for somebody else? Well, because they're leveraging you to make money, right? Yeah. Why are you taught to go to school? Because the colleges are leveraging you to make money. You get in the workforce, they're leveraging you to make money. And you're a W-2 employee, as you know, or a single, like a small business owner, you're going to give half of what you make to the government. And so they're using you. They're leveraging you. Government's leveraging you. Colleges are leveraging you. Corporate America's leveraging you if that's what you do. And then there's to be a responsible investor. You need to give anything that's left to your 401k or your Roth, whatever. Which there's absolutely a place for that in your portfolio. I'm not negating that, but I think a lot of people think that's the end all, right? And they don't realize that there's alternative assets out there. There's real estate. There's private equity. There's people that invest in this company, like this private equity shop that bought my company and made a ton of money for their investors, right? There's other investment assets, but Wall Street doesn't like that because they want you to invest in the stock market, which is really a handful of companies.
Yeah. I heard that this year, less than 1% of all companies in the US are publicly traded stocks. So over 99% you cannot invest in.
Bingo. Right. And you're investing at retail rates, meaning like that EBITDA arbitrage I was telling you about, like you're not getting in at a 5 multiple, next thing at a 10 multiple, you're buying at 20 multiples or 30 multiples. That's earnings per share. And I'm not a stock expert. I'm just saying, and who makes money in that world? And why is it that Congress was lobbied years ago to create the 401k? Well, they needed access to all of this retirement capital. These companies wanted that. That's how they fuel. So you're going to give your money. They're going to give you a nice 10% return, maybe, and that's great. No cash flow, no tax benefits, by the way. 10%, but it's in equity. It's a paper value. You're not actually, you can't eat that, right? It's not cash flow. And they give you a nice return. Well, they're making multiples on your money. Those executives and those companies and the insiders, they're making multiples on your money while they give you a nice 10 to 12%, or maybe if it's even 20%.
If that.
It was a banner year, right? They're doing that. And they're telling you, we'll give you a nice single or double digit return. And the money managers are making an obscene amount of money. They're making tons of money by charging you 1% to 2% or whatever the case is. So I'm just saying, like, understand alternative assets. Real estate was my shtick. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki early on, which says build businesses and build a real estate portfolio. And so, I started buying real estate early using the VA loan. I bought single family houses. I bought a duplex. They're pretty easy to get into, especially if you're a dentist. I mean, generally you have a decent amount of income, and like you need to diversify that cash into assets that can give you the tax benefits and some cash flow. And we call that in the 0 to 100 tribe, which is 0 to 100tribe.com, ZERO-TO100tribe.com. We call it R1. Retirement number 1 is where you have enough passive income coming in from your real estate assets that and I say passive because you can do this without running applications, fixing toilets. Like you can structure these to where it's true passive income and it covers all of your living and lifestyle expenses. We call that R1, retirement number 1. And that's not so you can get a fancy car. That's so you have choices. We call it time freedom is the new currency of the rich. You get time freedom. So that if you're a dentist, I can choose when I go into work. I can choose how active I want to be in my practice. I have options, and it's the freedom. That's where people think they're getting into real estate to generate, wealth. And really when you dig into it, they want freedom. And it's a great vehicle for freedom. And it's the most leverageable asset on earth, right? If you go into a bank and say, hey, I'd like to borrow $750,000 to buy $1 million worth of your stock, they're going to laugh you out of the bank. But if you say, I've got this nice apartment complex or self-storage facility or mobile home park or whatever that generates this much cash flow, and it'll pay the debt with a decent amount left over, can I borrow $750,000 to buy a $1 million apartment building? They'll do it all day long. What does that tell you? Like, what does that tell you? Because real estate is a great asset and it's very leverageable, and you can use leverage responsibly, right, with debt to multiply your equity returns and your cash flow. And you can build slowly. So like I bought a house, and my first house, I walled off half the garage. I lived in half the garage. I rented out a room. Right. And I lived in it for 5 years while I was broke, right? Going through all this business crap, like my car was leaking water on my head. I had a stick holding the window up, but it grew it grew $60,000 in equity in 5 years. There's no way I could have saved that kind of money up. No way. Because I wasn't making it. I was barely eating. I was like eating ramen noodles. And then I was able to parlay that equity into another asset that was a little larger and grow the equity some more. And then I parlayed that equity. I took a line of credit, and then I bought a duplex, and then I lived in one side and I rented out the other because I got the best debt terms, right? And I grew that equity, and then I sold it, and I did what's called a 1031 exchange, so I could not pay taxes on the capital gains, and I can roll it into a mobile home park. And I just grew up that way, growing. It's like an example of that 1031 exchange. I rolled $200,000 in equity into a mobile home park. I was making $800 a month passive income. I rolled it into a mobile home park and I started making $2,400 a month passive income. So I same equity, 3x the cash flow.
That's
And you can
awesome.
sort of use the financial engineering. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. I invest with my partner, Mitch England, who's a co-author of the book. And we have about 400 units collectively, him and I. And then outside of him, I have, and another 400 units, apartment complexes, mobile home parks, small hotel, nightly stay RV parks, mixed use commercial buildings, et cetera. But it all started with that first house that I bought zero money down.
Mm-hmm. It's like planting a tree. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next is now. People are like, well, do I buy a single family? Do I buy a duplex or short-term rental or an RV park? It's like, just start. I think for most people, just start. Buy a property that'll cash flow. Even if it's cash flowing $200 a month, you'll learn so much, and then you can continually grow from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think people they watch Instagram and they want to go get the home run and cash the check in front of their rented Lambo. I'm joking, but like they're looking for, and it's just like some of the most successful people are just hitting solid singles and doubles.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, that first one is so important because that first one might not make you millions intrinsically, but it will make you millions because it expands your mindset. And we're big with mindset in the tribe. Be like, why not you? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I actually did it. I did it. It didn't burn down and I'm not under a bridge, homeless. Like I'm actually getting some cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
It was easier than I thought. Maybe go from a single family house. So in the tribe, it's called the R1 framework. We have 5 phases. 1 is 0 to something, do something. Mm-hmm. House hack, buy a duplex, live in one side, maybe a single family rental. Maybe you have some capital and you want to invest with an experienced operator. Great option for dentists, by the way. Not a lot of time, maybe a lot of cash.
Mm-hmm.
You can invest with an experienced operator, but part of the deal is you learn alongside them. Mm-hmm. How do you underwrite deals? How do you look at them? How do you operate them? Like, what does this look like? And you're getting cash flow and you're getting all the tax benefits of real estate, but you're not running the day to day, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a 0 to something strategy. The next we call something to something more in the R1 framework, which is like buy a commercial asset, 5 units or more, a small commercial asset, because 4 units and smaller, the values are based on like what the house or the fourplex down the road sold for. Once you get over 5 units and you get a commercial asset, it's a small business. So for every annual dollar of profit you can create in that business, you're multiplying the value 10 to 20 times. That's a simplistic way of explaining it. Mm-hmm. Again, so you can start with the end in mind. Oh my gosh, I can raise rents. I can reduce expenses. I can put LED lights in. I can do all of these things. And for every annual dollar, I'm increasing the value 10 to 20 times. That's a huge multiple. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we say buy a small commercial asset and learn the value of forced appreciation, which is what that's called. Mm-hmm. And then niche down on an asset class. Is it small apartment complexes in Memphis? Is it mobile home parks in red states? Mm-hmm. Is it self-storage facilities in the Northwest? Like niche down, become really good at it, get your operations in order, and then you can scale. So yeah, we have a whole framework around it. We're out of time today, but we call it daisy chaining strategies. Leverage equity from one phase and then parlay it to the next phase and then acquire more equity and more cash flow.
Mm-hmm. That was awesome. Yeah. And to be respectful of your time, Travis, get wrapping up here pretty soon. Just as far as a couple books that maybe have changed your life and or that you would recommend for somebody that's wanted to invest either in real estate or some sort of assets.
Yeah, man. There's like how-to books and then there's mindset books. Mm-hmm. People often don't pick up the mindset books, but I say start there. Because if your mindset's not right and you don't have the why and you don't like take the green pill and like sort of, or the red pill, whichever pill it is in the matrix, like where you can sort of see above the world. So great mindset books, Richest Man in Babylon, love. Obviously Rich Dad Poor Dad. Man, if you haven't read Rich Dad Poor Dad, stop what you're doing right now. Go read Rich Dad Poor Dad. Huge mindset book. So those are really good books when it comes to mindset. What did I say? Richest Man in Babylon. Also, I'm trying to look at my shelf here. Also, when it comes to how-to books, obviously our book, we lay it out nicely, 0 to 100 units. It's on Amazon and Audible. Another great book to learn like the value of like cash flow and forced appreciation is David Lindahl. He's Multifamily Millions, not to be confused with Brandon Turner's book, which is also really good, which is like also called Multifamily Millions, or it's a slight variation. But yeah, I would start with mindset, like figure out your why, like why is it important? And then, and Richest Man in Babylon is a really good mindset book. Yeah. That's like, how do you get your money working for you? How do you think differently about things? And then get into the tactical stuff.
No, no, awesome. Thank you so much, my friend. This was awesome. And for people that want to learn more about Travis Dillard or 0 to 100, where should they go to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm the real Travis Dillard on Instagram. I'm not like a super social media guy. It's kind of a dumb name. I would say if you want to learn more about the 0 to 100 tribe, go to 0 to 100tribe.com. I said that earlier, ZEROTO, the number 100tribe.com. Yeah, go there, check us out, hit us up, message us. And like I said, that 0 to 100 is really focused on like how do you scale a real estate portfolio in a short period of time to generate actual cash flow to replace your day job and get to R1 or retirement number one. Like that's our whole focus.
With really good meat, like step 1, step 2. Yeah, I love that book. Just how you guys broke it down was really good.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, this has been fun. Sorry, I talk fast. My wife says I talk fast and a lot, but
dude, you're just dropping gold, man. Dropping gold nuggets. So thank you, Travis.
All right,
awesome. We'll wrap this up, and thank you so much. And we'll be talking to you soon. Take care.
All right, thanks.